Aloha, my name is Rob Toonen. I'm a research professor at the Hawai'i Institute of Marine Biology. The University of Hawaii Seagrant College Program, otherwise known as Hawaii Seagrant, is based at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in Honolulu, Hawaii. Hawaii Seagrant supports an innovative program of research, education, and extension services directed to the improved understanding and stewardship of coastal and marine resources of the state, region, and the nation. This is Hawaii Seagrant Podcast number 2, Loko ia.
Aloha, and welcome to our 321 podcast. My name is Kaleonani.
This is Rachel.
Hey, it's Rob.
And I'm Kaleonani.
And we are part of Hawaii Seagrant and the University of Hawaii, located in Honolulu, Hawaii.
This podcast features research supported by Hawaii Seagrant. Each episode will highlight a new project and the people that make the project possible.
We will ask these researchers for 3 words that describe their research, give them 2 minutes to explain how their research benefits communities here in Hawaii, and end by asking them to provide one thing they know about each other than their research. So, 3 words, 2 minutes, and 1 thing. It's a 321 podcast. All right, do you eat crab?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Crab is a delicacy here in Hawaii. It is very common to see crab at luau or family gatherings and even gatherings with friends. It can be very expensive.
Well, did you know even most of that crab that you see in the supermarkets is not from here?
Not even from the States either. A lot of it is imported from abroad.
Really?
Yeah, which is a little bit surprising because some of the stuff that we find at luau and parties, some of that stuff's actually local.
Yeah, and it could be from here if we had the ability to raise it in something like our fish ponds.
So, what are 3 words that describe your research?
I would say connectivity.
I would say community and management.
We're going to start with connectivity.
So connectivity is basically asking the question of where does the next generation come from if we are going to harvest something today in order for the resources to sustain so that our children and our grandchildren are able to have the same resources that our parents and grandparents before us had.
Okay, and community.
Community. So community is a word that I picked because our research actually started from conversations that we had at the community level. Literally, what are the kinds of questions that we have, or what are the kinds of questions that we might be able to answer or address because of the resources we have as a research lab at UH.
And management.
Well, I think management is basically trying to understand how do we think about our behavior so that we will have resources into the future. And what we tend to do in our lab is trying to figure out how to learn from the wisdom of the past, connect that with the technology of today, and figure out the best way to make sure that that resource and our ocean habitats and ecosystems persist into the future.
We are learning about Hawaiian fish ponds in this podcast, and here to share their research are Dr. Rob Toonen and his graduate student, Kaleonani Hurley.
Before we ask you how your research benefits communities here in Hawaii, let's talk about a few scientific words. So 3 words that you use a lot in your research are genetic structure, abundance, and population. Tell us what these words mean.
So genetic structure is basically the way that we understand connectivity. We were asking the question, where did the keiki come from? But marine organisms produce these microscopic babies that float around in the ocean, so we can't follow them. We have to figure out where they're going to or coming from by using DNA. And so what we do is we look at the DNA, and if, for example, we had all white crabs on Hawaii Island and all green crabs on Oahu, if they were mixing, we would find white and green crabs on both islands, which means that if we were to harvest, Oahu crabs could be supplementing feeding on Hawaii Island. But if there's no connection, if there's no exchange, all of the white crabs are on Hawaii Island, all of the green crabs are on Oahu. There's no shared genetic variation there at all, and we know that crabs of Hawaii Island cannot help to feed anyone on Oahu, and we have to look after our resources at home.
Abundance.
Abundance is essentially a count of the number of crabs of a certain species in a given area. So for a fish pond context, for example, we might want to know how many crabs do we have? But not only how many do we have in general, it's also how many males do we have? How many females? What about how many immature crabs do we have that might have just freshly settled out of the plankton? Or from a fisheries context, how many adults of legal size do we have? And all of those factors go into abundance in a fish pond. But paying attention to these different ideas of abundance is important not only for the one time that we go and we take a look, it's also important over time. And so that way we can figure out if there's any kinds of fluctuations. Maybe there's a time of year where we get a lot of recruits, a lot of little baby crabs that are just coming into the system, and other times of the year we don't see those as often. We might want to know those kinds of things, and we can figure that out by trying to understand abundance over time.
Last word is population.
So population is basically the group of organisms that are capable of breeding and producing offspring.
So tell us in 2 minutes or less how your research benefits the communities here in Hawaii.
So one of the things that we mentioned before was how the research was inspired from actual conversations we had with people in the communities. And then we've also been able to provide data right there immediately back to the communities when they've been gracious enough to let us in and help us collect samples.
Yeah, and so that to me is really great, because then the community has the information where if they want to know how many crabs are in the fish pond, how many could they harvest, and how can they step that up? Can they get more, or should they take fewer to preserve it into the future? They have that information right away to make that decision. And so it's this great circle between them asking us to provide the technology and the help, and us providing the information for them to make decisions about the resource.
All right, so let's recap. When asked to provide 3 words that describe your research, you said community, connectivity, and management. You provided definitions for 3 scientific words that are commonly used in your research. These words were genetic structure, abundance, and population. We've learned about your research and how your research will help communities here in Hawaii. So let's get technical. How do you do what you do?
Well, I think it starts with finding them in the first place. And I don't mean finding them at the markets. I mean actually finding them alive and hopefully well out in the environment. And so we'll go in, we'll get help figuring out when to go, where to go, and then we'll start actually catching the crabs, physically catching them. When we get them, we take a number of different measurements. So that's things like, how big are they? That's a standard measurement across the back. The widest part of the carapace, that's the back. So that gives us an idea for size. And then you flip it over, and you can tell a lot from a crab just by looking at it. When you flip it over, you can tell if it's a male, you can tell if it's a female, you can tell if it's immature, and you can also tell if a female's carrying eggs. So we take note of all of these things that you can observe about the crab. And then we need a sample for the lab, which means that we take a piece of leg tissue.
Ah!
That means you take a leg off.
The whole leg, actually.
You take the whole leg.
The whole leg.
All right.
Yeah. Crabs are totally capable of regrowing the leg that I took off of them.
Cool.
And they
It's
have
true.
so many, so we hope that the one that we took doesn't affect them too much. So that's why we don't take important pieces. So we don't take the claws, and we don't take the back swimming legs. We take one of the in-betweens. And then we thank it for its sacrifice, and we put it back in the water to live another day.
Okay, so once you get your crab legs from inside fish ponds and outside fish ponds and beyond,
And
right?
beyond, yeah.
Okay. What do you do?
So when we have those DNA samples, we bring them back to the lab, and just like you've seen on TV under CSI, when they bring it into the cool lab with all the glowing machines.
It takes 30 minutes and you're
it's
done.
definitely
I
cool.
wish. But it's sort of like that, but in really slow motion. We eventually get all of the DNA, and we can address the question of where did these crabs come from, and where's the next generation that we were talking about for connectivity and genetic structure using those tools.
Right.
And that's the technical aspects of how the work is actually done.
Well, that's a wrap. But before we go, we want to ask you, what is one thing, Rob, that you know about Kaleo other than her research?
Well, Kaleonani means the voice. And I know that Kaleonani is a wonderful singer.
Kaleo, what's one thing you know about Rob other than his research?
One thing I know about Rob, other than his research, is that he is a fabulous example of having a balance between your work life and your home life.
Work balance guru, Rob. I like it. I like it. So stay tuned for our next podcast, and mahalo for listening. Aloha.
Aloha.
This Hawai'i Seagrant 321 podcast featured 3 songs. Happiness by bensound.com, Ukulele by bensound.com, and Cute by bensound.com. Find it on iTunes or bensound.com.